Helps if you unmute your microphone. Welcome to the stream, everybody. I'm Ian. I'm the author of TechInterview.guide, and wanted to share a bunch of tips and tricks tonight for you about the Leetcode Grind. It's kind of one of those inevitabilities that are not going to go away, but drop a hi in chat if you're there. Let me know where you're from. Just curious where everyone that's joining so far. What's up, Coding More? Good to see you back. Always lovely to have you on the stream. Who else is in chat? I don't think there's a way for me to see who's actually here, so y'all are gonna have to tell me like where you're from. So I know we got at least one person from the West Coast, a couple others. How's it going? Thanks for dropping by. All right, Portland, sweet. Been there once. Python conference back in like 2014, I think. Really good town. It's pretty interesting to hang out. Cool. Let me get some background audio going here. Make sure I'm playing the non-copyrighted music this time. Had a problem with that a couple of weeks ago on a stream. Played the wrong music, put the video up on YouTube, and YouTube's like, not making money off of that one, which is fine. I'm not looking to make money off this stuff anyway. Cool. All right. Well, welcome to the West Coasters. Got a handful of folks on the chat. We're up to 15. Hello, everybody. All right. So to get started, let me go over to this screen here. Just to get started, the whole topic for tonight is just how do we reduce the Leetcode grind. Leetcode's not going away. It's one of those things that is just going to be around for a while yet, but we want to make our interviewing process a little bit nicer as we go. And so my hope with what I'm going to go through and sort of like present tonight and talk through over the next hour and a bit is just some of my favorite tricks and tips to kind of reduce the Leetcode grind a little bit. Definitely drop notes in chat. We're definitely here to support each other. Please be kind and inclusive to one another. We're all here to learn. So just keep that kind of stuff in mind. I am trying out a few chat commands. There's like a bang help that you can do, and it'll give you some links like YouTube and LinkedIn and Twitter and things like that that you can use to find out how to connect with me. For those watching on YouTube later, I'll be dropping some links in the video description down below. Cool. Well, let's dive in. So when it comes to interviewing, my whole reason for doing this stream was to help give you a better way of preparing for these interviews. The whole idea of the Sunday night stream is like, let's get you ready for the week ahead so that you've got some things that you can actively practice, put into practice right away. And Thursday's stream is really about like, let's have some people on the show to kind of talk about how they do things differently. Had a great chat with Jesse from Ibotta on Thursday and learned a little bit about how Ibotta is doing hiring in a very different way. And just some different things about how they approach interviewing and how their time in quarantine as a company really allowed them to kind of reset the whole process and go, hey, let's figure out how to do this whole thing differently, because they kind of put everything on pause as far as hiring goes. And I'm hoping to get a couple of HR folks on the show this week on Thursday to talk about applicant tracking systems and how they work and how kind of that whole process works from an HR point of view and how they do their initial screens and so on. So stay tuned on that one. Next Sunday, we'll do another show as is. The following Thursday, July 29th, I may not do a stream. I got some stuff going on, so I may not be online that Thursday. I'll let you know how it goes. All right, but let's dive in. Got a handful of folks on here, so hello. Chat with one another, drop questions kind of as we go. You're absolutely welcome to interrupt me. I will pay attention to chat kind of throughout. I've got 3 main tips that I want to go through, and then if we got time at the end, I do want to get to a resume review as well. I like doing online resume reviews. If you do bang resume in chat, it should drop a little note in there about how to do a resume review. All right, so when it comes to tech interviews, practice makes better. I never ever tell people that practice makes perfect because no one's ever going to get perfect at interviewing. As soon as you think you're perfect at interviewing, they're going to change it, and now you got to learn a bunch of stuff all over again. But practice is going to make you better at it. Tech interviewing back in the day, well, I would say like early 2000s, really started with a lot of like the goofy mind teasers, like how many golf balls fit in a school bus. Thankfully, nobody's really doing those kinds of questions anymore because it didn't really give as many positive signals about hiring in the interview other than like a little bit of critical thinking. But as far as like what the day-to-day challenges were going to be, it really didn't give a lot of good input. And so companies stopped doing that one, thankfully. But what they ended up shifting to was more of this like tech challenge kind of interview style, where sites like Leetcode, HackerRank, Code Wars, and all these other sites have kind of sort of risen up and go, hey, we're going to help you practice all of these. You can buy premium memberships on them, and they give you feedback on how you did and so on. And now that Leetcode style interview has kind of really sunk its teeth into our interview process, and it is now kind of the de facto interview process. But at the same time, a lot of people that go through these interviews realize like this isn't what the day-to-day job is really like. This really isn't what we do on a day-to-day basis. And so is it really fair to put people through that kind of process? Well, unfortunately, that's not going away anytime soon. And so what I wanted to do is kind of share my tips and ideas, both as an interviewer as well as an interviewee. I recently changed my job about a month and a half ago. And throughout that process, I was like, well, I guess I'm going to have to go like get into the Leetcode grind myself, because as I interview with other companies, I was going to be dealing with some of that. Let me find out where this random music is coming from. Not there. Here, it has some random music showing up in my headphones. All right, so the information that I'm going to share here, I've shared in a lot of one-on-one sessions with people that have told me that they've practiced hundreds and hundreds of Leetcode challenges so that they're going to feel prepared. And throughout the course of this, I'm going to be dropping a bunch of links in chat, as I mentioned. And again, for those on YouTube, I'll be putting them down in the description. So I want to say up front that I'm not affiliated with any of the sites that I share tonight, any of the URLs that I drop in, unless I explicitly tell you so. So most of the time, the site owners don't know I'm about to drive a bunch of traffic to them. This is just for disclosure purposes there. Preparing for interviewing, I think it's always a good investment in your time. But I think that we can use that time in a smarter way. So that's kind of why I've got on my little notes over here. Like, we want to work smarter, not harder, which is kind of the old Dilbert cartoon quote. But we want to think about how to do this differently. We don't want to just grind and do hundreds and hundreds of Leetcode problems. I don't think that that's a good way to practice. Someone reminded me on LinkedIn of an analogy that I used to use about working out at the gym, and so I kind of wanted to bring that up here as well. I think that practicing for interviews should be about quality and not quantity. Like, I could go to the gym and I could do the same sort of repetitive thing over and over, but I'm not going to gain as much. For example, I got a little like 3-pound weight right here. I could like just lift a 3-pound weight. You know, am I going to build up muscle? Sure. Am I going to exercise some tendons and so on? Sure. Am I going to like bulk up like, you know, Olympia, like a Mr. Olympia, you know, weightlifter? Certainly not. I'm not going to gain as much lifting a tiny little weight. I could go to the gym and I could move the equipment around, but it's not going to be as good as if I had like a coach or like a personal trainer there with me, helping me out. And so I think of this whole stream as me sort of coaching, like, here's some things to try. And so take that for what it's worth. So tip number one that I want to jump into today. Tip number one, mock interviewing is a really great place to start. I did a fireside chat with the CEO of interviewing.io back in April, I believe it was. And Aileen Lerner runs that company, and she's doing a fantastic job trying to help people prepare for mock interviews. And for disclosure, I am a mock interviewer on their platform. I've been there for about 4 years. And I've done just under 1,000 mock interviews. I think I got up to about 970 when I decided I needed to take a break for, you know, this job change. And so I've given this kind of information out in a lot of those one-on-one interviews around like how to practice, how to get better and do a little bit better, as far as you know, how to practice things in a different way. And so my tip number one, mock interviewing. It's a really great place to start. So I'm just going to add some stuff in here. So tip number one, mock interviews. Again, when we kind of come back to the gym analogy, without somebody there to tell you how to do something better, you're not going to get better. You can do these Leetcode challenges and you can think that you're doing okay, and you can kind of constrain the amount of time that you spend and see how quickly you can kind of get through them. But that doesn't necessarily mean you're doing it in a good way or in a really efficient way. Your code may not be as effective as you think it is. And so having somebody there to actually work through a mock interview scenario with you is really going to give you better feedback. Interviewing.io, they actually do data-driven blog posts, And one of their research topics that they've come out with, I think in the past year, is that 5 is kind of their magic number as far as mock interviews. If you can do 5 really quality mock interviews, then you're going to be better prepared for doing the real thing. So just keep that in mind. So I'm going to drop one link in here. First one is for Pramp. Hopefully that's going to work. Yeah, there it goes. And then the other one is interviewing.io. And so just a quick note for both of these, the Pramp promos, because I did some guest blogging for them and they gave me this promo code to give out to people that will give, it should unlock unlimited interviews on their platform. It's a good place to start. I don't know that it's necessarily the best one for mock interviews because you don't really know who you're getting paired up with. It's just someone else in the community. And while that can be helpful, you don't necessarily know what level you're getting paired up with. Like if you're a senior level dev, you might get paired up with an entry level dev and vice versa. It's not, I don't know that it necessarily matches you up as far as experience level goes. And so you may not get the quality of feedback that you really hope for. Another good place to reach out for mentorship is just within the community. So, feel free to drop your LinkedIn profiles in chat and connect with one another. I'm here to kind of build up this whole community. So let's connect with one another. Drop your LinkedIn URLs in there, and you can do a bang LinkedIn if you want to see mine. And by all means, connect with me on LinkedIn. And so I'm a big fan of interviewing.io. The link there at the bottom is actually the iio.sh. It's actually a referral code for me on interviewing.io. Like I said, I've been a mock interviewer there, and so their platform is, that you're getting mentored and getting a mock interview with someone who is trained to do interviews, and they're going to give you very targeted, very specific feedback. And a lot of the tips that I'm going through for the rest of this stream is advice that I've been giving out as that mock interviewer on interviewing.io for 7+ months, where I've really found a lot of common threads happening. And so part of why I wanted to do this stream broadcast specifically for tonight is because I wanted a way to kind of get this information out in front of more people. So like I said, a lot of the tips and tricks around Leetcode are going to come from my time on interviewing.io. What I've found in my experience is that people who grind on Leetcode, they can eventually figure out how to solve a problem. The amount of time that it takes varies. And I think the people that do the best on the Leetcode style code challenges are those who study the algorithms themselves. And so in my experience on interviewing.io, the people that tend to do better on the platform are either fresh out of school where they've just learned these algorithms, or they've specifically gone back and they've studied like CS50, on YouTube, or like a lot of the other like YouTube channels and podcasts like Base CS and things like that, where they are teaching you these specific algorithms to think about. And so the people that study those, and that's like actively in their brain, they tend to do better at these Leetcode style challenges. But what about people that have been out in the industry for a while and they're getting back in? I've done plenty of interviews with people who have been in the industry for like 5 years, and now they want to go change their job, and they're like, oh, I got to go learn this stuff all over again. Because even the interviews that happened 5+ years ago weren't what they are today. They weren't this aggressive Leetcode model. And so it's been a little bit harder for them. So I think that you do need to solve the problem. You do need to make significant moves toward a solution when they present you with a Leetcode type of problem in a tech interview. For most companies, you do have to solve the problem. They expect that you're going to solve the problem. But for some companies, it's really going to be more about your process, especially when you're new in the industry. If you're kind of entry-level dev, how you communicate, how you demonstrate your problem-solving skills, it can be just as important to them as a working solution. If you can get a working solution, that's even better. If you're kind of intermediate and senior level, they're going to want to see like significant moves, if not a full, complete working solution. It doesn't have to be the most optimal, the most efficient. For me, when I would interview somebody, if someone was writing really great looking code but didn't finish, and someone else wrote working code but it wasn't very optimal, I would tend towards hiring the person with the less optimal finished code, because I know that I can trust that if I give them a problem, they're going to solve it in a deadline. The other person, it's like, well, I'm always going to have this worry in my mind now of, am I ever going to hit a deadline if I hire you? Because if you can't finish it in an amount of time. But not every company feels that way. I've certainly changed my outlook on that over time as well. And so not every company, they don't expect everybody to finish the problem. In fact, when we talked with Jesse on the stream last week, he mentioned that a lot of the stuff that they do, they don't expect a full solution. It's really just this collaborative kind of communication of, here's a thing that we wrote, tell us what you like, do a little code review, show us how you'd implement some kind of change or how you might make something more efficient, more effective. And it's really more like what you would do on the day-to-day kind of job. And I think that the companies that are going to succeed in the future are companies that pivot away from the Leetcode style problems and more into what you do on a day-to-day basis. Trying to grind through hundreds and hundreds of Leetcode problems. I'll tell you from experience, most of the people that I've done problems with, they usually say something like, oh, this reminds me of this other problem that I've seen, but then they kind of fumble on it. I've actually taken a really old tech challenge from like 2005, 2006 that was introduced to me about 4 years ago. Around 4 years ago. And I've basically rewritten it to be my own sort of custom problem. That's the one that I give out the most on interviewing.io. And a lot of people that see that, they're like, oh, this is kind of a really unique kind of problem, but it reminds me of the knapsack problem, or it reminds me of the coin change problem. There's some really well-known kinds of problems like that. But the trick with Leetcode problems is really identifying what kind of problem this is, and then applying strategies that you've learned about that kind of problem. I would say one of my biggest tips here is don't waste your time memorizing a solution for a given problem. You want to memorize how to solve that kind of problem in a very generic kind of way. And I think that this really starts with writing out good pseudocode. So I've got some tips on pseudocode process. So tip number 2 is a pseudocode process. And I'm going to go into more detail on this. So whenever you're given a tech challenge, you never want to jump straight into code. You always want to take a step back. You want to think about it. You want to design it. Because remember that the interview is a way for you to show me what you're going to be like as an actual employee. That interview is really you demonstrating, this is what I'm going to be like to work with on a day-to-day basis. And hopefully similar to them, like if you ask them questions, they're going to be forthcoming with some information. If you ask for some help, they're willing to jump in and give you a little bit of help instead of just watching you struggle and fail. Because that's not somebody I would want to work with on a day-to-day basis. And so how you're treated during the interview is also going to be indicative of what it's going to be like to be on the team at that company. So like if I were to give you a problem like, you want to go into a store or you want to look in a store catalog online and you want to try to buy whatever you can out of that catalog to use up a gift card that you got as a gift, like for a birthday or something like that. How do you even analyze what kind of problem that is? That's really the biggest sort of struggle when it comes to these Leetcode style problems, is like, what kind of problem is this? What kind of algorithm should I even use? I'm not going to spend time on the stream tonight about how to figure out what kind of problem it is. I'm going to give you some more like generic kind of tips and tricks. But when I think of these kinds of problems, especially when I'm writing out pseudocode, there's actually a Bob Ross channel here on Twitch. Don't go there now. Stay here for my stream. But there's a Bob Ross thing, Twitch channel, where they just stream him painting his paintings. And I think of pseudocode a lot like how Bob Ross would paint a painting. And so that's kind of my tip here. So you want to write notes. Bob Ross paints a picture. And what do I mean by that? Well, he doesn't start with the really fine little details. He doesn't start with the happy little trees. He starts with the sky, and then there's always a mountain with snow on it, and then he adds the shadow, and then he's adding like kind of the foothills and things like that. Like he adds things in layers, but he starts with very general concepts and then gets more and more granular. And you want to do the same thing when you're thinking about the problem and you're designing out a problem. You want to start at a really high level and then gradually get down into the fine detail. And so when you're writing out pseudocode, you want to write it out like Bob Ross would paint a picture. You want to start very general, and you want to add detail over time. The trick here with pseudocode is you don't want to add so much detail to your pseudocode that it's locking you into an implementation. you want that pseudocode to stay pretty generic. And I'm going to talk about some tips about that kind of as we go. And so how do we practice this? Well, I'm going to drop a link in the chat in a sec. And it's basically a website that was given to me back in January. So it's not my website. The person doesn't know that I'm sharing it on the stream. But I think it's a really, really good tool to practice this kind of stuff. So let me drop this link in the chat. Again, this is not mine, but I have communicated with the author of this site on. Actually, let me just switch over to that one. I have communicated with them on GitHub, because they're like, the platform that they built is actually on GitHub. You can click on the little GitHub link here up at the top right corner, and that'll actually take you over to their GitHub profile where you can see the code of what they built. But basically what we've got on here is we've got a curated list of Leetcode problems, and there's, I don't know, 100, 170 or so on here, of the hundreds and hundreds that are on Leetcode. And so what I really like about this site is that he's broken it down into the kinds of problems. You can also narrow it down by difficulty as well as companies. We're going to get into companies in a little bit, but we're going to start out with just these types of problems. And this kind of comes into our pseudocode process. So I would say, like, tip 2B is teach yourself some algorithmic thinking. And we're going to do this by learning how other people solve the problem. So what do I mean by that? Well, let's just pick one from the list here. I'm going to go with fast and slow pointers. So if we pick fast and slow pointers from the list, now we've got just those problems. And so now what I could do is I could just pick any one of these at random. And now we're going to go figure out how do we try to solve this problem. And so his site, again, is just going to open up on Leetcode. So let's do middle of the linked list. All right, so I haven't done this particular problem. I haven't done a lot of stuff on Leetcode myself in a really long time. But you can kind of see it's got the whole kind of layout here. It gives you a really nice description of what's going on. Now, we know that this is a fast and slow pointer problem. And so we're kind of cheating a little bit. When I talked earlier, one of the hard things about getting a Leetcode style challenge is what kind of problem it is. Well, by using Sean's website, we know what kind it is, but we're here to try to see how other people have solved it. So the first thing that we're going to do here is we're going to go into this discussion forum link here. We're not going to do the discussion link at the very top menu. We're going to go to the one where it says discuss 999+. And this is basically the discussion forum for that problem. And this is where other people have posted their solutions and they talk about it. And so my tip here is teach yourself some algorithmic thinking. Okay. But we want to do this in a programming language that you don't know. And it's important that you do it in a programming language that you do not know. Because if you go look up someone's answer in a language you do know, you're going to memorize their syntax. And the point that I want to teach you tonight is that it's about memorizing the strategy, not the syntax. We want to learn the strategy, not the syntax. So your pseudocode has to stay really high level. And so I'm also writing out some notes kind of as we go, and I'll share that screen back here in a moment. So for example, if I don't know C++, I'm going to go click on the C++ solution. If I know Python, I'm not going to go look at the Python answer. In my case, I do know Python very well. I can read C++. I'm not fantastic at it, but 100% faster, that one's maybe a good one. So I'm actually going to open several of these C++ answers in other tabs. Okay. So the other thing to do here in my notes is I'm going to open 4 or 5 other solutions. So all I'm doing in my code editor over here is I'm just writing out some notes. We want to do this in a programming language that we don't know, and we want to open 4 or 5 other solutions. Okay. So from here, what do? Well, if I go and I look at these other tabs, we would actually see how they're actually solving the problem in C++. So we've got a number of different solutions in here. So what do we want to do from here? Well, from here, what I want to do is I actually want to write out the pseudocode for what I think their code is doing. And you might say to yourself, I don't know C++. How am I going to do that? Do I need to go learn C++ in order to do this? No, you don't. Because if we look at what's happening here, I know enough C++ to know this is a method This is my return type, and this is a parameter that I have coming in. So I've got a parameter called head, which is the head of a linked list. And I can kind of see, okay, well, fast is not null. So I could just write down steps like, until, the fast pointer points at nothing. Again, we just want to be really vague with how we write our instructions. I think when it comes to writing pseudocode, it's really important that we don't lock ourselves into an implementation. Okay, so what we want to do here is in the code editor. Let me switch back to my code editor here. In our code editor, what we want to do is we actually want to write out the pseudocode for 4 or 5 answers, and then see if we can position those in a window in our editor where we can kind of see all of them together. And so if I just walk through this first one, I'm just going to paste it in the editor here and kind of show you what that process would look like for me. So here's their C++ and what my pseudocode might be. So I'm going to start a function, and I don't have to give it a name. I have a function and I have a parameter coming in called head node. And when I write out my code, I don't use curly braces, and I try to, just make short little statements about what I think is going on. And so I have a slow pointer pointing to head, and I have a fast pointer, pointing to head's next node. Now, I haven't locked myself into an implementation here. I haven't said specifically how I'm doing that. And that's the whole idea with pseudocode, is we want it to be really high level and just figure out from there, when we actually get to the implementation, we'll worry about the actual detail. So now I've got this while loop, and while fast is not null. So I can basically say loop until fast pointer points to nothing. Again, I'm not locking myself into an implementation at this point. And then I've got this block of code. Slow is looking at next, fast is looking at next. And then if fast is a current node, then I'm skipping ahead one more. So inside this loop, we're going to advance our slow pointer once, and we're going to advance our fast pointer twice, if possible. If it's not possible, we only advance once. And then at the end of this, we can just return our slow pointer, because then we know that, basically for each step, the slow pointer only goes once, but the fast one goes twice. And so the next step, the slow one goes once and the fast one goes twice. So by the time the fast one gets to the end, the slow one is in the middle, and that's how we find the middle node of a linked list, only going over the data one time. You could go through all the nodes, count all the nodes, and then start back over at the beginning and then go halfway through that number, but now you're kind of going over the data 1.5 times. And so this is actually a more efficient kind of algorithm. So fast and slow pointer problems, this is a pretty generic algorithm, and this would be pseudocode for one of those solutions. If I go back to my browser and I go look at someone else's, I can kind of see it's the same thing. I start them both at head. While I have a fast pointer and the fast pointer is not null, do the same thing. So this algorithm is effectively the same thing. If I go to this one, I've got a much sort of bigger sort of algorithm here. And again, I'm going to write out the pseudocode for a lot of these. And then I want to compare all of the pseudocode next to each other, because we want to see perspectives from lots of different people. Now, it could also be that, maybe I want to go look at an answer that's not in C++. So here's an efficient Java solution. And I'm just going to kind of bounce around here. Here's another one in Java. Here's one in C. Here's one in Go. I want to go see the one in Go. So we have our function. We have a parameter coming in called head. And same kind of thing. What is our current node? What's the length? Our length is currently pointing at the head node of our linked list. Current is going to point to head, and our length is 0. In this case, they're counting all of them, and then it looks like they're looping until we get to the middle of that node, or until we get to the middle of that list. So this is kind of that second algorithmic way that I mentioned. So again, just seeing other people's perspectives. I happen to know Go, So I wouldn't write pseudocode on this because I'm more likely to memorize the syntax of what they did. And the trick here is that we want to look at the strategy of how we solve this. And this is where writing out the pseudocode is a much bigger help. And so I would put each of the pseudocode in its own little window, and I would open all these windows so I can kind of see all of them together, because this is how you're going to learn the strategies for this. Once you get those strategies down, what do we do with that? You'll start to see kind of common patterns emerge. You're going to write those down in some kind of summary a little bit. So I might even summarize this even smaller, where I just say like, start at head, and we're going to advance slow pointer once, and we're going to advance fast pointer twice. This is our algorithm in 3 steps. And so now I don't need this anymore. What we can do at this point is, now that we've summarized this in our own little way, I can write this on a post-it note and I can put it along the edge of my monitor. So now the next time I'm practicing through a problem, if I think that it's going to be a fast and slow pointer problem, I can just glance at that post-it note and go, what were those couple of steps that I need to do? If possible, you want to try to weed or sort of narrow down, condense all of these algorithms into 3 to 6 steps, if possible. So when we talk about like a backtracking depth first search, for example, we're going to loop over something. And as we loop over that thing, we maybe have, we want to act on a decision of some kind. And then we want to recurse, where we change some inputs. And then maybe we need to undo our action, which is what we call backtracking. This is every backtracking problem in 4 steps. So if you're trying to solve a maze, for example, we're gonna work until we get to a decision point. I'm gonna work through the maze until I get to an intersection. Now I'm gonna act on that decision. I'm gonna go left. So now I need to repeat everything that I've done. Well, now that I've gone left, I want to keep working until I get to another decision point, another intersection. And then I act on that decision. I'm gonna go left first and see if I get to a dead end, or do I get to another intersection, or do I get to the end? And so I keep repeating that. But once I get to a dead end, that's where I need to come back from the recursion and undo that action and go, okay, well, the last time I turned left, that didn't work. So I'm going to kind of unwind back to that intersection. I'm not going to go left anymore. So maybe I'm going to mark that in some way that says, don't go that way. And I'm going to go straight instead, or maybe I'm going to go to the right instead. But this is every backtracking algorithm in 4 steps. So you can write this stuff down, put that on a post-it note. So the next time you're working through a problem, you go, oh, does that sound like it might be a backtracking problem? What are those 4 steps? You've got it on a post-it note right along the outside of your monitor. And now you can refer to that really quickly. And so our tip here is we want to condense to 3 to 6 lines and write it on a post-it note or something. And if we want to get really specific about disclosure, I'm a 3M shareholder. My dad used to work at 3M back in the day, so I love using post-it notes. Keep using post-it notes, make my stock go up. But we can basically take all of this now, and we're going to write it on a post-it note, and we're going to place these around the edge of our monitor or screen, wherever you're going to study this stuff. Okay. Now, go see if you can implement that pseudocode. Now that you've narrowed that down, go back to the problem and see if you can implement your own pseudocode, not their code, okay? It's not meant to be a line for line kind of trick. You want to try to implement your own pseudocode. If that worked, great. Your pseudocode was a good sort of step. You were able to condense all that down. You were able to build a solution off of those 3 to 6 steps. If that doesn't work, then you need to figure out, okay, well, what went wrong in that process? So maybe you need to go back and refine those steps. And so this is kind of like, there's like a feedback loop in here of, did that work? If not, do it again. Find another programming language you don't know. Find 4 or 5 solutions. Condense all of those down. See what happened in that strategy, and then try to implement that. So now we want to try to implement our own algorithm. If it works, great. If not, repeat. Once you get it to a point where, hey, that algorithm worked, okay, it worked for that problem. Is it going to work for another problem? Well, now we can actually go back to Sean's website and say, okay, well, that was the middle of the linked list. What if I want to add two numbers together? Do we jump into medium? Do we stay with easy? Let's remove linked list elements. So this is another one that Sean has tagged as a fast and slow pointer problem. Well, let's go try and see whether that algorithm that we came up with, those 3 to 6 steps, let's see if that's applicable here. It's not always going to work out that way, because algorithms could be implemented slightly differently, like especially with arrays and graphs and things like that. Like there are a lot of different algorithms that you can do for each of those. And so the algorithm isn't always going to be completely locked in. Like this is the only way to do a fast and slow pointer problem. That's not always the case. You may actually have a couple of post-it notes for each kind of problem, and that's okay. It's okay to have that, because when you're actually working through a problem, you're like, I think this might be a depth first search. You're going to go look at the different algorithms that you've written out for a depth first search, and you're going to try to implement those to see which one is applicable. It's okay to have multiple, but those are the things that you want to study. So someone mentioned in chat, sounds like you need to understand some of a language to do this, correct? I have no idea what's going on with the C++ example. And that's a great takeaway on that. So thanks for sharing that. So let's go take another look at one of those. So this one was in Java. I'm not great in Java. I can kind of get by. I've written some C and I've written some Go and I've written some compiled languages like this. So I kind of guess what's going on. The thing with programming languages is they're a lot like spoken languages. As you work in several of them, it's easier to pick up more. You can kind of see how some of this is going on. Like we've got a class, and then this is just how you build a function. You've got, is it public, is it private? You've got what, like the return type of the data that you're getting back, and then you have the name of the function, and then you've got your parameter list. In Java and C++, the data type is at the beginning. This answer that we had in Go, the data type is actually after the parameter name. And so we don't have the return type over here. The return type for the method in Go is actually at the end of the line. So there are some nuances that you may have to look at, like I don't even really understand what the shape of this thing is, but you can, like as you practice this stuff a little bit more, and as you learn programming language, or like really understand your own programming language, then you can start to kind of piece together what someone else's algorithm's actually doing. Now, if you're really stumped and you really can't read that syntax, then go find an answer in a language that you do know. But again, it's about memorizing the strategy, not the syntax. You don't want to memorize the syntax of how somebody else did the thing. You want to work out your own pseudocode. You have to work out your own pseudocode. You have to work out your own implementation and study that. You don't want to have to like try to memorize hundreds and hundreds of problems. And that's one of the biggest fallacies that I've seen, like I mentioned earlier in the stream. I've seen people say I've done the grind through like 500, 700, 900 Leetcode problems. This one that you've given me kind of reminds me of something that I've seen, but I don't really remember. And that's because you're just going through the motion of like lifting that tiny weight. You're not actually getting better at it. You're not really getting better at it. All you're doing is you're practicing the same repetitive motion over and over again. You're not getting better. You have to get feedback from other people to know if you're actually getting better. And this is why mock interviewing is important, and why practicing with someone else and getting feedback from someone else is vital when you're practicing for this kind of stuff in a tech interview. Can I zoom the screen a little bit? Yeah. So on this one, so this was the answer in Go. So again, we've just got the function marker, we've got the function name, we have the parameter name and the parameter type, and then the return type of the method. That's in Go. In Java, I think this one was Java, it's a little bit different. We have a public-private declaration, then we have the data type of the return value, and then we have the name of the function, then we have the parameter type, and then the name of the parameter. So the languages are a little bit different as far as how that stuff goes. But if I were to look this up in Python or Ruby or JavaScript, it would also be pretty clear. I mean, those languages typically aren't typed. They have like a little bit of type hinting in some of them, but they're not really strongly typed. And so you're just passing in a parameter of a name. It's not necessarily being declared as like a node class or an integer or something like that. And so it's going to vary a little bit kind of as you go. And so some of it, like I said, if you can't understand it, close it, find another one that you can understand. And if that means you do have to go look at a language that you do know, then that's okay too. But again, you're not here to memorize the syntax. And so you have to be careful. Like if you look at it in a language you don't know, it forces you into high level thinking because you don't know what the syntax is doing. You're kind of making a guess as you write out that pseudocode. All right, so let's get back to some of our notes here. So if you can, like I mentioned, if you can implement your own pseudocode, great. If not, it's that feedback loop, and you can kind of go back and you can refine that process a little bit. And then you basically want to do this for lots of different kinds of problems. And so if we kind of go back to Sean's website here with all these different problems, there's a lot of different ones on here: arrays, breadth first search, backtracking, binary search, bit manipulation. Some of these are more popular than others. Dynamic programming by far is one of the most popular interview challenge types, but there are lots of different ways of doing dynamic programming. There is a bit of a misunderstanding in my experience of what dynamic programming is. Some people think it's about this multi-dimensional matrix that you have to sort of build in memory, where you're trying like every possible combination of things and you're building up this big data set of answers, and then you sort of seek into that to try to find the right answer. That can be one way of doing dynamic programming, but the idea of dynamic programming is really the principle of, is there a repeatable subproblem that I can do? Like if we go back to, you want to do some shopping out of a catalog, it is a repeatable problem because you're going to say, well, I'm going to buy this thing out of the catalog. Now I have this much money left. Now I'm going to go back through the catalog and pretend I only have that much money. What can I buy in the catalog for that much money? And I'm going to try and buy something. And now I'm going to go back through the catalog again. And so you're repeating that problem as a subproblem. And so the idea with dynamic programming is the idea of, is there a subproblem to solve? And if you can kind of get your mind into thinking about a problem in a way that, yeah, that sounds like what I'm trying to solve for this Leetcode challenge or this tech challenge in a real interview, then maybe dynamic programming is what you want to reach for. So at the end of all of this, what do we have? We got Post-it notes all around our monitor. We've got lots of pseudocode that we've kind of gone through and we've analyzed. But we haven't really gotten to how do we identify that problem? Because in a real interview, they're not going to say, hey, I got this really cool dynamic programming problem I want you to solve, or hey, I've got this fast and slow pointer problem, or this sliding window problem. They're not going to tell you that. They're just going to say, here's the problem to solve. And you have to figure out what kind it is, and you need to do it in a hurry. And so generally what I advise is you generally want, you want to take about 5 minutes to think about the problem. You want to like maybe re-explain it back to the interviewer and talk about, you know, different sorts of strategies, immediate things to come into mind. You want to write all this stuff down, by the way. You don't want to keep it in your head. Keeping it in your head, you're more likely to forget later on. Like, what was that 28th thing I said I was going to do when I built that thing out? This is why you want to write this stuff down as pseudocode. You want to actually write out the pseudocode in your editor so that you've got some ideas on how you want to try to solve the problem that you're working through. All right, so let's go back to our notes here. Oops. Notes go. My notes disappeared. There we go. All right. All right. So that was basically tip number 2. How do we kind of work through all of these things and work out all of these algorithms? What we want to do from here, tip number 3, is we want to build a workout schedule. So tip number 3 is build a workout schedule. I call it working out because I'm kind of keeping with this gym analogy. But what we want to do here is we want to build a rotation of problems that you want to practice on a regular basis. Now, the cadence and the frequency of that is up to you. Practicing this stuff is an investment in your own career. Your brain does need to take a break from time to time, just like our muscles need to take a break from time to time. You can't just go to the gym every single day and run on the treadmill. You have to take a break once in a while. That's why we have like leg day and arm day and chest day and back day and whatever. Like, you're working out different muscle groups on a regular basis, but you're not always working the same muscle every day, all day. It's dangerous to your physical health to actually do that. And mentally, we do need a break from time to time. And so we do need to build a rotation, but we need to build breaks into that as well. And so whether you do this daily, every other day. Someone mentioned in chat interval-based learning. Yeah, that's right. It's a good way to put it. This could be daily or every other day. Whatever works for you, like whatever your timeline is to go get a job. This is what you need to sort of work out as that schedule. And so just remember, you do need to build breaks into the schedule as well. All right, so our brains actually work best with repetition. And so we do have to do these problems over and over again. Sec. There we go. Got some music playing on my headphones again randomly. So some advice that I have heard, Jeff Casimir, who is the executive director of the Turing School of Software and Design, he used to give out this advice to students. And he would basically say, doing 10 things once is not as effective as doing one thing 10 times. So doing the same thing 10 times is better than doing 10 different things only one time. And while I think that repeating a problem 10 times is a bit excessive, research has shown that our memory does kick in and we do engage our long-term memory when we repeat something. And so it is important that we repeat things. And other research that I've actually read just throughout this year alone, because I started reading up on, how the brain works a little bit and how we actually develop memory, short-term versus long-term. And the idea with long-term memory is we do need to kind of space it out a little bit or span it out a little bit. So we don't want to repeat this problem. Like even if we want to repeat it 4 times or 5 times, we don't want to do it 4 or 5 times that same day, because all we're doing is we're sort of, really reinforcing that in our short-term memory. So what we have to do is we have to spread this out over a couple of days. And so what research has shown is if you learn it on one day, repeat it 2 days later, and then repeat it 3 days later. And so what I want to do is I want to talk a little bit about how I might build up a schedule of this. So I'm just going to look at some random sort of problems on Sean's website, and we're going to practice just writing out a bit of a schedule here. So today is Sunday. Let's work through like a depth first search problem. And I'm just going to label this depth first search 1. So it just means like the first depth first search problem that I'm going to do. Now on day 1, let's write this out here. So day 1 of a problem type, and this will generally be like maybe the first time you do it, and I'll talk about this, but day 1 where you're trying a new type of problem, this is basically where we want to get into the algorithmic thinking. So we want to do the algorithmic thinking and our pseudocode and like our post-it notes. That's going to be on, post-its, there we go, post-its. That's basically going to be like the first day that we do a particular kind of problem. And so if we were to do a depth first search problem today, like we're starting today, then this is going to be like our pseudocode post-it kind of thing. From here, we got Monday, we got Tuesday, we got Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Now, it's not going to be exactly this same thing all the time, but this is going to kind of give us a framework. Now, we know that repetition is where we want to do that problem again 2 days later, and then we want to do it again 3 days later. And so we're going to repeat that depth first search problem on Tuesday and again on Friday, the exact same problem. Now, when we repeat that problem, what we have to make sure that we do is as soon as we solve it, let me go up here and write this. As soon as you solve it, erase all your code. And you might say to yourself, I just went through all that. Why am I erasing all that code? Well, it's only the code to actually solve the problem. You're not like, you can hang on to the pseudocode if you want, because I think that that's a good refining sort of process to go through. But when you actually solve the problem, erase the working code. Because when you repeat that problem 2 days later, you want to start over from scratch. You don't want to build it based on pre-existing code. You have to start over using just your memory. That's the point of this. We're studying this stuff to lock it into our memory and to engage that long-term memory. And then once we solve it, we erase that code. We do it again 3 days later, and we see if we can do it again. What you're going to find is as you practice this over and over again, you're going to get faster at solving that problem. Now, I did say at the beginning of the stream, this isn't about memorizing the solutions to any given problem, and that's true. But what we are doing is we're going to use those post-it notes and go, how do I solve this kind of problem? if I remember right, it was a depth first search problem. So I've got this algorithm over on the side of my screen. So I'm just going to start writing that out as my pseudocode. And hey, what do you know? I can actually implement that problem really, really fast. Well, the next time you actually cycle around to doing another depth first search, like maybe if we were to repeat this cycle over and over again, oops. Let's copy this down here. We're going to paste this in a few times. You know, maybe the next time we go do a depth first search problem, maybe that's going to be like up here on this Thursday. And so this is going to be depth first search problem number 2. Well, we know that we want to repeat that 2 days later, and then we want to repeat it 3 days later. Well, now we're coming up with a completely different depth first search problem. And I'll talk a little bit about the frequency and the cadence in a moment. But this is kind of how we want to lay this out. Well, on Monday, so maybe we're going to do like a fast and slow pointer problem, and we're going to do number 1 of that. And then we're going to do that 2 days later, and we're going to do that 3 days later. Now, if you know that a particular company is really big on dynamic programming problems, then we want to work that into our schedule as well. And so you always want to try to start your day with the new kind of problem and do the repeated, like the repetition of a pre-solved problem that you've done. You want to do that after. And so that's why we bumped the depth first search 1 to the end of this list. So we're going to start with dynamic programming number 1. Now we're going to do that again 2 days later, and then 3 days later. So now we can kind of see how we're gradually building up a schedule here. You know, so let's say this one's going to be like a binary search problem. Well, we're going to repeat that one 2 days later, and we're going to do it 3 days later. So now we can kind of see what this schedule is going to look like going forward. Is you want to work out a schedule like this and stick to it as much as you can. Now, not everybody has the kind of time to practice lots and lots of these problems. And so I do recognize that there is an element of privilege in here where not everybody has, you know, the time to like go work a full, you know, during the day if you're working another job and then study at night for hours and hours and hours. You might have a family, you might have other things going on, you might have multiple part-time jobs that you have to juggle. So how you invest this time is totally up to you. I'm just showing this as an example. But what I'm getting at is we need to practice this stuff on a regular cadence, on a regular frequency, where you're getting into the discipline of doing this over and over again. Okay? If you can happen to do this like a 4th time, that would be even more optimal to remember that particular problem. But again, we're not here to memorize how to do one problem. We're here to memorize the strategy of how to do all depth first search problems, or all fast and slow pointer problems, or all, sliding window problems and so on. All right, so if you want to target a specific company, and this is where I'm going to kind of like wrap up some of my notes here. If you want to target a specific company with this, then this is where we can use Sean's website even more. So what we want to do here, I'm going to go back over to Sean's website. And what we want to do here is we want to keep the patterns on all. And now I want to say like, okay, well, you know, I really want to target like a Google company. Actually, let's do Amazon. Amazon's a good example here too. So these are problems that Sean and whoever has been helping Sean kind of curate this list. These are problems that they know Amazon will ask. I've actually gone through and I've counted dynamic programming, depth first search, and backtracking are the top 3 problems that you want to try to work on if you're going for a job at Amazon. Those are not the only 3, but those are the top 3. And so I think as you're kind of working out the cadence of what this schedule is going to be, you need to drop in more depth first search, more dynamic programming, and more backtracking problems into this list, because you're more likely to get asked those kinds of questions. But you're not guaranteed to get asked those because companies rotate these problems all the time, but the kind of problem probably isn't going to change. So you do want to study these like on a regular basis. You want to study lots of different kinds. But if you're targeting a specific company that happened to be on Sean's list here, you have a list of problems to solve that are more likely to get asked by that company. And now you've got a more targeted list of things that you want to study more frequently. Now, if we think about the different kinds from this other drop down, like we've got like bit manipulation, for example. If I search for bit manipulation on here, that one only comes up a couple of times, I think 3 times on the whole list. So does that mean like don't bother studying bit manipulation problems? You have a really rare chance of getting that asked that kind of problem, but not a 0 chance. And so you do want to do some of them from time to time. Now, I've done mock interviews with people where they're like, all right, cool, that's a cool strategy. This whole week, I'm going to do nothing but depth first search. Next week, I'm going to do breadth first search. The week after that, I'm just doing graphs. And the week after that, I'm just doing arrays. I'm like, all right, cool. Well, 4 months later, once you get through all those different kinds of problems, you go interview at Amazon, they hit you with a depth first search. You haven't done a depth first search in 4 months. Are you really going to remember it? And so that's why when you're working out that sort of regular cadence, you want to make sure that you're going back and you're revisiting the types of problems that you know you're more likely to get asked. And so you need to make this on a regular basis. Like I know depth first search is probably going to come up. I know backtracking is probably going to come up. I've got a much higher chance of those kinds of questions coming up. And so I need to study those more often. But, maybe in here, I'm going to do like a bit manipulation problem. And let's see, let's do like a heap problem or something in here. Not a 0 chance that you're going to get a heap problem from Amazon. So, maybe study that once in a while, but then maybe you don't need to do a heap problem for like another week or 2. Now, when you actually go to that interview and they throw a problem at you, you're like, oh, that sounds like a depth first search. I just did one of those a couple of days ago, and I just did it a bunch of times. And I've done lots of other depth first search problems. And I'm going to remember what's on that post-it note, because over time, you're going to use those post-it notes less and less because you're implementing those strategies much more frequently in a much more concentrated way, that you're going to start to remember those algorithms. You're going to go, oh, depth first search. Okay, this is what I need to do. And your pseudocode is going to get much faster. Your implementation is going to get much faster. Your overall design is going to get much faster. And now you can spend more time in the interview actually communicating about what you're building, why you're building it, why you're choosing to do something a particular way or not. And then what I would recommend doing in here as well is take a break. But you can also spend some time analyzing other problems. And what do I mean by analyzing? Well, that means actually going to Leetcode. So let me switch back over to that screen. So what we're going to do here for Leetcode is I'm literally just going to go over to Leetcode. I got to sign in. All right, fine. Go to Explore. How do I get to just all the things? Problems. All right, so here's just a bunch of problems. I don't necessarily know what kind of problem these are, so longest valid parentheses. It doesn't tell me here what kind of problem it is. And so what this analyzing step is on break day. So on break day, you're not actually solving these, but what you're going to do here is you're actually going to try to guess what kind of problem is this? Is this an array problem? Is it a palindrome problem? Is it a stacker queue problem? Is it a graph problem? Is it a depth first search? Is it dynamic programming? Like, just take a guess at it. Just take a wild guess. And then go into that discussion forum and see how other people have answered it. You're not writing anything out. You're not writing out pseudocode. You're not writing out a solution. You're not going to try and actually solve this. You're just analyzing, like, I think it's this kind of problem. And then you're going to go look through the discussion forum and see if you're right. And you're going to do that for however many you want to practice. But your break day now is just going to be spent picking just any random Leetcode problem, not through Sean's list, because you'll know what kind that is. But just go just to Leetcode, pick one at random, and try to guess what kind of problem it is, just based on the description alone. So the description that we saw in this problem, given a string containing the characters of an open and closing parentheses, find the length of the longest valid well-formed parenthesis substring. What kind of problem do you think that is? Off the top of my head, I don't know either. I would have to go through and I would have to analyze some of these. I've seen problems like this that use a stack and a queue, so I would be more likely to load things up on a stack and then try to dequeue, and as I dequeue, I'm going to keep a running counter. And then if that counter is bigger than the last counter, I'm going to keep track of that. that sort of thing. And that's how I would probably solve that kind of problem. So I'm going to guess it's going to be like an array problem or a stack queue problem. And then I'm going to go into the discussion forum and I'm going to see, am I right? Is that how other people solve that problem? And so everyone's a little different on how you want to try to try to guess at what those problems are. But that would be my tip on that. Is on break day, just go analyze other problems. And so again, you don't want to limit yourself to just the problems that are on here. So we picked Amazon. We see kind of like the top ones. One suggestion I actually gave to Sean for his website, and he actually really liked the idea, was if I pick a company and I don't pick either of these drop downs here, if I just pick a company, it would be nice to see like a, something underneath that, like a subheader of, these are the kinds of problems quantified. Like, I counted like 30 dynamic programming problems and 25 depth first search problems and 20 backtracking problems, something like that. It would be nice to actually see a count so that you can kind of gauge like, okay, well, this kind of problem is way more popular than this other kind of problem for that particular company. And so that would be one thing that I would love for Sean to implement on here. But hopefully that helps. I'm curious in chat if you've got questions or what sort of ideas around those tips that I gave sort of stood out for you that you found helpful when it comes to like how to think about Leetcode and how to practice through Leetcode. So tip number one, do mock interviews with other people. It's really helpful just to get feedback from someone else who can actually advise like, hey, you did this part really well, this part you need to work a little bit more. And then step two, when you're actually going through Leetcode, like start with pseudocode process. What's that going to be like? Analyze it, break it down, go look at other answers, summarize that into like 3 to 6 sort of lines, put it on a post-it note. And then tip number 3, build your workout schedule, like build a regular cadence that you're going to stay disciplined to and actually work through. Make sure you build in a break day in there as well. So you got to give your brain a rest as well. And then like stay hydrated while you're working through it. So drink water, keep that stuff going. Your brain uses a lot of energy, a lot of sugars, especially. So, you want to make sure that you're eating healthy as you're walking through this stuff. One question in chat, do I recommend any difference in strategy for folks newer to the industry versus mid-level and more experienced devs? No, I actually give this exact same advice, whether you're an entry-level dev or a senior-level dev, because I think that it's helpful either way. If you're brand new in the industry and you're just learning code, it might be a little bit harder to really analyze and understand what's going on in other programming languages. I think as you kind of advance in your career, it's a little bit easier to just, okay, well, I don't know Java. I'm going to go look at Java and I can kind of guess what's going on so I can write out my pseudocode. But when you're brand new at this and, maybe you've gone to a school of some kind, you've only learned like 1, maybe 2 programming languages. And if you're having a hard time reading those other languages, then just go find answers in a language that you do know. But aside from that, no, I give this exact same advice out no matter where people are at in their career. Yeah, thanks for asking. I appreciate that. I think these are generic enough steps that this can be helpful no matter what, even for mock interviews. I think even as a mock interview, being early in your career, I think there are a lot more folks out there in the community that can help. So definitely reach out to people that you know on LinkedIn. Reach out to people at your school if you've got like an alumni network or something like that. Reach out to them and say, hey, I'm looking for someone to do a mock interview with. Is anybody with 2+ years experience have some time to like walk me through like a Leetcode kind of challenge, or just what they do as a tech interview or a behavioral interview. You got to practice this stuff with other people. The best tennis player in the world can only get better at tennis if they play someone who has slightly different strategies that they can also learn from. The best chess player in the world has to play somebody that's better than them in some way in order for them to improve. No one's the best at interviewing. Everybody can improve in some way. And so I think by having lots of that feedback and doing multiple mock interviews with other people, I think is the best way to go. I think it's the best sort of strategy to dive in and get that immediate feedback on what you've done well, what you need to practice more in order to improve. I think that's the number one thing. But then when it actually comes to practicing Leetcode, absolutely work through that pseudocode process. Do it like Bob Ross would paint a picture. Start with really high level detail, get more and more granular. But if you start finding that as you're adding that detail over time, that you're locking yourself into implementation, then you've gone too far on pseudocode. One thing that I've actually seen a lot of people do in pseudocode is they actually write it out like real code. You want to stay away from that as well. I think writing out pseudocode, it really just needs to be everyday language. I don't think you want to write pseudocode where you're literally writing syntax, because now you're absolutely locking yourself into an implementation and you're kind of getting a fixed mindset on this is how I must do this. And that's not always the right answer. So I would say if you keep the writing, like how you've written that out, if you keep it a little bit vague and keep it more high level, like even mid-level kind of design, then you're more likely to have a bit of freedom in the implementation, where you can still say like, hey, I need to loop over this thing. Well, do you use a for loop? Do you use a while loop? Do you have a do while loop? Do you have an until loop? Like, what kind of loop do you want to do? The interviewer may ask about that, and now you can have better communication with them over what you think your implementation is going to be. But you don't want to change the pseudocode. You want the pseudocode just to remain the pseudocode. Then you want to leave that on your screen while you're implementing the real thing, so that if you get distracted and you lose your train of thought, you know where you left off. But you want to add that detail over time. But again, if it starts getting too detailed, you need to back up and go back a little bit higher level. Work all that stuff out, put it on those post-it notes, and then study those post-it notes. This is the best way of sort of improving the Leetcode grind, because just grinding 500 plus or 700 plus kinds of problems because you really want that job at Google. Yeah, okay, you'll get really good at like hearing a Leetcode problem and solving it or whatever. Is it the most efficient way? I don't know. Is it the most effective code? I don't know. Is it the best code you could possibly write? Don't know. But you've done 500 of them. I mean, in some cases, that's a badge of honor in and of itself. It's a huge achievement to do that many. Not everybody's got that kind of time. And so I wanted to kind of give these tips out on how to condense this. How do we study this in a slightly different way where we're actually learning something from Leetcode instead of just doing the grind. And the reason that I specifically pointed this out on Leetcode and not HackerRank and Code Wars is because I really like that Leetcode has a dedicated discussion forum for each problem where you can actually see solutions for each problem. Now, you can also go on YouTube and other channels, and you can actually find people who are actually solving these problems on a regular basis. And it's good to kind of watch them do it. And I've certainly watched some of those streams myself. I think the danger there is you actually get locked into how they solved it. And they don't always go into why they solved it a particular way. They're just like, oh, well, here's this problem. All right, well, that's a depth first search, so blah, 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 blah. It's like, well, how did you know that was a depth first search? Because again, identifying what the problem is sometimes part of the challenge. As you practice this and as you kind of do that analyze step on break day, the step down here at the bottom, as you take that step, you'll start to learn how these things are going to kind of analyze over time. Now, as you kind of follow this schedule on a regular basis that you build up for yourself, you're going to build up this schedule for what works for you. You're going to find that you just naturally get better at identifying problems over time. Like, even though if you go through Sean's site, is like, okay, well, you know that this is a depth first search problem, so you can immediately jump to those strategies, and that's okay too. Eventually, you don't have to do the pseudocode thing anymore. Like here, where we started, the new depth first search problem, we could go through and analyze it again just to make sure that our pseudocode is going to be right for this depth first search problem. If not, maybe we need to go analyze how this depth first search problem was slightly differently. Maybe we end up with a whole new post-it note. But now we're learning something from Leetcode. We're not just sitting there grinding and, banging our head on our desk, trying to figure out how to come up with a solution. We're actually learning something from it. So by looking at other people's solutions, writing out pseudocode, analyzing that pseudocode, summarizing it, I think that's a really good study tip for Leetcode. And I think it's going to reduce the amount of Leetcode that you have to do from months and months and months into a much shorter amount of time. But again, you have to cycle through all the different problems and don't just do it once and go, well, I did one depth first search problem, that's enough. It's like, well, you probably need to, once you get to the end of the list of how you've built out your schedule, repeat all that, do it again. While you're interviewing, you'll start to sort of see strategies, as you get, some other problem, whether it's through a mock interview or a real interview, your brain's going to go, oh, wait, that sounds like something that I just did. What was that thing? Was that a fast and slow pointer? And you can kind of like work through that much faster. And that's why I said, like, as you get better at this, you're actually going to improve how quickly you identify it, which will then make it faster to kind of work through the design and work through the implementation. You'll get through that much faster as well. Cool. I'm curious what other people think in chat, if you've got other ideas and so on in there. Cool. Thanks for the follow, DTI. Appreciate that. Hopefully these tips and ideas are helpful. Again, I just want this stream to be like as many cool ideas as I can get out into the masses. So I have techinterview.guide written up as a website. There's a free email series on there that you can subscribe to. You can unsubscribe anytime. I don't remarket to anybody. As soon as it's over, it actually automatically unsubscribes you. And it's just, you know, common interview questions that I would ask as an interviewer and why I ask that kind of question. Like, it's kind of getting into my brain a little bit about what I expect to hear in your answer. I don't answer the question in the emails generally. I think a few of them I kind of dive into some technical detail on some of them, but it's a mix of technical and behavioral questions. But I basically frame it from like, why is it important from my point of view as an interviewer? Why am I asking you that kind of problem or asking you that kind of question? And it goes through like a whole range of things. So it's 6 weeks long. You get an email every day, and they're meant to be really short reads. So you can read them over breakfast or read them over lunch or something like that. It's meant just to be like little nuggets of information. So go check that out. You can follow me here on Twitch if you want to see me go live every Sunday, every Thursday. Sundays, I'm going to do more streams like this, where I'm also going to do a resume review, and I'm going to do a quick resume review before we wrap up for the night. And then on Thursdays, I'm going to have folks on the show where we can learn from them about what the interview process is like where they are. We're going to hear from HR people. We're going to hear from recruiters. We're going to hear from other engineering managers. We're going to hear from just other people in tech, like what was their interview process like. And if you want to be on the stream, I mean, feel free to email me. You can do like bang Twitter, bang LinkedIn, in chat, and you should see my contact info. If anybody wants to try those, I'm curious if those are actually going to work. But yeah, by all means, connect with me if you want to be on the stream sometime. If you've got some perspectives you want to share, let's chat about it. Let's do a quick resume review, and then we'll kind of wrap up for the night. So let me go find a download. I'm going to pull this in. So this was an anonymized resume that was sent to me. And if you do bang resume, so if you want a free resume review, I will do these on the stream, generally on Sundays. But I'm certainly open to different ideas and so on as well. I've done them on Thursday streams as well when I have other people, because it's sometimes fun to hear how other people might look at a resume as well. So I'm going to start this resume review the way I start all of them. Opinions are like armpits. Everybody's got a couple. Some of them stink. These are just my perspectives. I've done lots of interviewing. I've done lots of screening, but this is just how I look at a resume. It may not be how everybody looks at a resume, but these are the things that sort of stand out to me. The first thing I generally do, I mean, I'm going to ignore the second blank page. It was just how it was formatted and sent. Is I like to zoom out a little bit and just look at the white space usage on the page and see this big gaping hole right here. I think that could probably get filled in with some information. I like that the bullet points are short, but all I see is this big empty hole over here on the right side. And so I might rearrange things on here a little bit, or describe things a little bit differently, or format it a little bit differently, just to make better use of the page. Yeah, and I will zoom in on the resume as we go. Like I said, I like to kind of zoom out. When I'm doing a resume review, I kind of zoom out first just to see what the white space usage is like. Like, is their margin use okay? Like, is there like a big giant, block at the bottom of the page where they didn't write anything? Or is the font enormous, because they didn't have very much to say? Or is the font too small because they're trying to pack so much in? So I like to kind of look at those sorts of things. I immediately see, like, this bullet point wraps over a couple of lines, and that's generally a no-no. I try to avoid that as much as possible. Okay, so now that we've got that out of the way, let's zoom in. And let's see what Brian Anon has to say on their resume here. So they give themselves a title of software engineer, and I think that's fine. And we can see that they're somewhere in Oregon, give us a fake phone number. I really don't like these vertical bars, because these vertical bars actually ended up as part of the link. I mean, if we look at the hover down at the bottom of the page, it actually comes out okay. It says like mail to and email address at gmail.com, which is fine. But when I'm reading it, it looks like there's like an L or a capital I or something, and there's another one at the end. So I generally don't recommend using vertical bars as separators. Either use white space or use a comma, but get rid of those vertical bars. I think that it's distracting to read, and it can be misunderstood as other letters, especially in this case where the email address is in there. Cool. And then LinkedIn and GitHub, they give us just their username, which is totally okay. People that know LinkedIn, people that know GitHub, they're going to know how to use that. What I might do though is actually, since you're giving me a link to an email and down here at the bottom, you've given me links to projects, is I would probably just make like a LinkedIn link and a GitHub link and just give me those links immediately. In this case, they use the same name on both sites, which is totally okay. But that would be one thing maybe I might do a little bit differently as far as the contact info. I like kind of the dark cyan color on white. I think it's a good enough contrast. Just a little bit of color in here, just to add a little spice. I think it's fine. And they got a good objective in here. So I'm a recent grad of a full stack development course with certification from some school in somewhere Oregon, ready to further explore opportunities, utilizing a programmer mindset, a history of learning new words, and history dating back many years of working with people. Holy run-on sentence, Batman. All right, so number one, I would break this thing into like several sentences. Generally, what I recommend for this objective or summary, whatever you want to call it on the page, is I would try to adapt this from a cover letter that I'm going to write for the job. And the cover letter, I would generally do 3 paragraphs, where the first paragraph is introducing you and what you care about. The second paragraph is like the skills that they're looking for in the job post that you have. And the third paragraph is like why they're awesome as a company. I would then summarize each of those paragraphs into 1 sentence each, and those 3 sentences become the summary on your resume. That's how I would do it. Your mileage may vary. In this case, this is very buzzwordy. I don't get a lot of content out of here that really answers the question, why should I hire you? And I've said this on the stream before. When I'm looking at a resume, I'm looking for a reason to say no. I got a lot of these to go through. I'm looking for a reason to go, nah, too buzzwordy. This doesn't tell me anything about Brian. So other than you're a recent grad, you're a full stack developer, you're telling me that you're in Oregon. If I'm on the East Coast and I don't want to relocate you, you've already given me reason to bias against you. And so I'm more likely to say no on this. So I think you can actually write this summary in a way. Someone that I had on the very first stream, his name is Jonah, and he works at New Relic. Awesome guy, amazing human being. He actually really likes this to be kind of fun and playful and like tell me something really unique about you and your perspective. I like to see the objective here really show me like how are you aligned with my company? Like where are you going in your career that aligns really well with where our company is going, and are we headed in the same direction? Because if we're going in the same direction, I'm more likely to bring you on the team. But this is just super buzzwordy and pretty generic. I don't really get a lot out of this objective. Does that mean it's bad? Not necessarily, but I think that there's some things in here that are, wouldn't mean anything to me as a company. They really like history dating back many years of working with people. Or is that just history? Like, are they a history student or they just have a job history? I think it's job history, but in this case, it was a little confusing. I'm like, oh, they like history dating back a long time working with people. What? Like, it starts to confuse me a little bit as I read this. So that might be the one thing that I would look at. Again, with the vertical bars, I would drop those. The dates, I would move all the way over here to the right margin, and then don't have any text sort of wrap underneath those. And so I would generally put these dates like right up against whatever this right margin is over here. I would move the dates over here. So then as I'm sort of seeing those dates, I can kind of build like a pseudo column of those dates, and I can more easily sort of scan that and see a timeline. So the first thing they're hitting me with is their education. Well, the first thing I look for when I'm screening a resume is, do you have the skills that I'm looking for? I've got to skip this whole section to get to your skills and ability. And then I would want to see, okay, well, you say you have these skills, where have you practiced them? The first thing you're giving me is experience where they haven't used any of these skills necessarily. Their project work is way down at the bottom. So again, I'm going to skip over all of this stuff in the middle to go look at their projects. Again, this is just my bias as a resume screener and as a hiring manager. I like to see skills and then projects and then relevant work experience. Now, in this case, they may have had stuff in here. They were a production manager for an event venue, so probably not a lot of use of this stuff in what they want to do as a developer. So at the very top, they're calling themselves a software engineer. Their very first skill is a whole bunch of Adobe tools, which have nothing to do with software development. And then they tell me they're good at pair programming. But so far they haven't, well, I guess up here they told me what they learned at the school, but their skills and abilities, they haven't really called out like the programming language and framework. That's all hidden kind of back up here. So now I've got to kind of like bounce back and forth to try to get all of the pieces together to find out like, what do you know as a developer? Because I'm going to look at this and go, okay, education, okay, I'm just going to kind of blindly skip over that and look at skills. But again, I don't have language framework that was back up here. So now I feel like a Quentin Tarantino movie where I'm going in the past and going back to present, going to the past, jumping to the future, back to the present. Like, give me all the stuff in the order I need to see it. And so I think it's okay, like that all of this is kind of all of their skills all put together, but I would call it out as such. Because if this is where you've learned all of these skills, if this school somewhere in Oregon, if this is where you've learned all this stuff, then just put all this stuff together in one skill block where you specifically call out the technologies that you know, the technologies that you've used, and then other things like pair programming, agile, team experience, Git workflows, things like that. Like put all that together in one big skill block. Because then I think it'll also help kind of get rid of this big gap on the page over here if you kind of combine these things and make those lines a little bit longer. So that might be one way to do that. And then you could still have an education block where you say like, full stack development at the school in Oregon or whatever, and the dates that you were there. Now, if you're currently a student, I wouldn't put current, I would put like your expected graduation. Subject to change, but I think putting current on there, it tells me, well, you're still there as of July, but when are you done? Like, are you done in a month? Are you done in 6 months? Are you done in 4 years? Like, is this a 4-year program? Like, how long do I have to wait before I can hire you? You've been there since October. It's now July. You don't tell me anything about how long this program is. So I don't know if you're available immediately or if you're applying for an internship. So that would be a couple of things that I would sort of think about here is I would put like an expected date of graduation, if possible, or expected month of graduation, or tell me something about the school as far as like 1-year program or 7-month program or something like that. Because then I can kind of count and go, well, if you've been there since October and it's 7 months into the year now, it's at least a 10-month program because you've been there for 10 months. So again, you're raising more questions than you're solving for me right now, and I'm more likely to just pass on this resume. So some things to think about there. So again, I would combine all of these skills together. Now, when it comes to the skills, you want to put things on the resume that are really relevant to my company and my role. If I don't give a rip about Adobe Creative Cloud, I don't care that that's on your resume. That it's not meaningful information to me. What would be meaningful is if I was a C#.NET shop, or if I used object-oriented programming languages and MVC-based frameworks, then I would care that you know C# and .NET. Or that you've used JavaScript, which is also object-oriented. React is not really MVC. Node.js is also not really MVC. So, I can kind of guess at what you know, but you're making me do a lot of work here, a lot of thinking to try to imagine what you know and what you don't know. REST API design is great. TDD is wonderful. I love seeing that. But I would probably call out like, what are those tools? Well, in this case, they use Jest for testing. But you didn't tell me how you did any testing with your C# and .NET code. Like was that test driven, or did you only use Jest on JavaScript on the front end? So again, I think you could add more information on here. This work experience, I love that there's a lot of quantifiable stuff on here. 700 events, 30 plus staff per day. You're giving me good numeric data and you're putting numbers in here, which make it really easy to spot that you've given me quantifiable information. Bullet points got their name from being fast and impactful. They don't have to be grammatically correct. So I think you could really shorten this stuff or break it into a couple of bullet points. But again, if this production management kind of role isn't applicable to me and my company, you don't need to give me 5 bullet points. You probably only need to give me 2 or 3 just to really wrap up and really condense what about that job is important to me. Because again, I'm looking for a reason to call you so that I can maybe interview you and maybe hire you. Trained all event staff, that would be fine. That tells me that you've done training and management kind of level duties. but I think that you could really condense a lot of that stuff down as skills. Now we're getting down into your projects, where you're giving me like some of the technologies that you've used, but again, you're giving me really long sentences. I would probably bullet point some of these. HTML is not all caps, so that to me is like an attention to detail kind of thing. Although JavaScript, you do have a capital S in there, so you've got a good eye for detail on some of that stuff. But I would go back and just make sure that that this stuff is really sort of buttoned up from that point. Media optimization tool allows users to compress, apply a series of filters. Okay, quadcopter, this application can control a small quadcopter, allowing a user to give it. Okay, cool. I would probably rewrite this immediately from the user's perspective. User can control a quadcopter using software that blah, blah, blah. User can quickly apply filters, blah, blah, blah. Like immediately give me that user impact. It tells me a lot about you as a developer, that you've got user empathy because you put the user first. I've generally said we are our first user of our project, but we're not the user. Who did we build this for? What are they going to care about? And then I like to see a couple of bullet points on here, like tell me something geeky or fun, something really relevant to my company about this project. Like, why is this project on the resume that you've given to me? That would be really important for me to see. And then give me a bullet point of just the tech stack of the important things. So again, if you're doing .NET, you don't have to say C# and .NET. You can just say .NET. Or if you're doing React, you don't have to list JavaScript as a tech stack. You can just say React, and I know that you've written JavaScript. So some things are kind of implied there. So yeah, overall, I think that these are good projects. I would put these projects up higher though. And then, sorry, Brian, I actually clicked on the link and it actually went over to your GitHub for a moment, because you've actually got the real links in here for your resume. As far as what we're seeing on here, let me zoom back in on these. So these are actually going over to GitHub, which is fine. If you've got them live and deployed somewhere, give me a deployment link as well. I really like to see that. As far as white space goes, I would probably put the links up near the title and then put all the stuff down below on bullet points, because right now you've got kind of a project description, a blank line, a link, a blank line, and then another project description. So they kind of look mashed together. If you didn't have all caps and bold on here, this stuff would just completely blend in together and it would be really hard to see. I think you could format this a little bit differently to stand out. So those are just my initial thoughts and impressions on there. Hopefully that'll give you some ideas, Brian, on how to go over that resume. But again, these are just my own perspectives. I think from an applicant tracking system point of view, so Brian sent me a PDF of a docx file. .doc is the format that you want to use for applicant tracking systems. They can read Word documents really well and parse out kind of the order that you put things on a page. When we look at a PDF, sometimes what I'll do is I'll actually highlight all the text on the page and then paste it into a text editor. And I'll show you what that's going to look like over here. Because sometimes people don't realize that this is what actually happens. So when I paste all this stuff in from the PDF file, this is how the applicant tracking system is actually going to get the text out of here. And I've done this before where the text gets really garbled, or it mashes it all together and it loses the spaces, and it becomes really hard for the applicant tracking system to kind of parse out where things are going. Hey, thanks for the follow, Lily Hazel. Appreciate it. I think that was the sound that I was hearing, like kicking in, going, "Where's that music coming from?" Because I had my notes over my my broadcast software, and I wasn't seeing that people were following. So I appreciate that. But this is how I would look at what the applicant tracking system is going to see as far as like the order things are coming in and the keywords that it's going to have access to from that PDF file. And so I think that's a really handy tool if you really want to submit a PDF. Highlight all the text, paste it into just your code editor, and see what kind of text it looks like. Like, does it look right? In this case, it came up with their name and software engineer all on one line. Gave the location, their phone number, their email address, LinkedIn and GitHub, with a name. The applicant tracking system is not really going to do much with this. And that's why I think if you actually made those links to LinkedIn and GitHub, I think you'd have a better time there. And then you've got that objective, where all that came in. You've got education, and it's going to be able to kind of like pull this stuff out. But when it comes to education, it may link all of these bullet points as part of your education and then see skills and list all of these as skills. And so again, the applicant tracking system may not pick these up as skills. It's going to pick them up as keywords somewhere on the page. But if I'm saying, hey, I'm looking for somebody who specifically knows C# as a skill, depending on how the applicant tracking system works, it may not flag your resume. I don't know for 100% certain, but that would be my worry. And so that's why I would combine those together into one skill block and put the education down by itself somewhere else. But otherwise, like all the other information came in here just fine. Now, in this case, like I said, it did come in as a 2-page kind of resume just because of how it got formatted and saved as a PDF file, and that's fine. But the applicant tracking system was going to track like a page 2 as well. So just keep those things in mind. All right, I'm going to wrap up for the night. That's my hour and a half. Hopefully that was really helpful. Drop your LinkedIn profiles in chat. I'd love to connect with some of you as well, or feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to connect with folks on the stream. For those on YouTube, go ahead, like, subscribe to get notified of when I'm adding new videos. I'm generally going to add these to YouTube immediately following the broadcast here on Twitch. And all the links that I've put in chat, I'm going to put in the YouTube description as well. But yeah, thanks for coming by, everybody. I'm actually happy to take a few questions. If anybody's got questions about like Leetcode practice or tech interviews in general, I'm happy to just hang out for a minute. Cool. Thanks for dropping those in. Let me go connect with some of you here as well. But yeah, if any of you got questions or anything that you want to chat about real quick before I end the stream, I'm happy to stay on for a minute longer. But as far as like the main content I wanted to get through, that was kind of the stuff I wanted to chat about. What else you got? Let's hear for some folks. Nothing. You're all super quiet. What was I 3D printing back there? Great question. So little fidget spinner, little in-place gear mechanism, and so these things all turn inside the gear. So as this one in the middle kind of stays stationary, the rest of them turn. This is actually impossible, or pretty impossible, to build using metal, because you'd have to figure out how to build each of the gears. I don't know if you can kind of see inside of it very much, but the gear mechanism is what we call a herringbone gear, where the actual teeth on the gear are at they're kind of like triangular points, and so you'd have to make each of those. You'd have to like really form fit them all together, and then you have to figure out how to like clamp it around with a metal ring of some kind. Where in 3D printing, it all prints in one big piece. So it all prints all in one shot, and you literally just take it off of here and give it a bit of a crack, because sometimes the stuff kind of sticks together a little bit. But then this is the one that just printed, and so now it moves. So just looking at little trinkets and things like that. My kids have a thing that they do at school around wintertime, like a winter festival kind of thing, where they sell like 3D print stuff. So we usually fire up all the printers. I got 3, 4. Got 4 of them here. I got a 5th one in the garage, and we usually get them all fired up and printing things. So, herringbone planetary gear, yeah, pretty fun. I'll show you the other thing that I love a lot, and that's this guy. It's a 3D printed dragon that I started painting, and this is basically going to be my adult version of Toothless from How to Train Your Dragon. So I started painting his mouth purple, things like that, and actually get some real teeth on him. So that was kind of a fun one to print. This one's actually a very dark purple. It looks black, but it's a extremely dark purple. So yeah, that's the kind of fun geeky stuff I like to print. So yeah, full print fleet for sure. Cool. Well, thanks for hanging out on the stream. If there are other interview questions, please reach out on Twitter, reach out on LinkedIn. I'm happy to chat with folks, happy to connect with everyone. Again, I'm just here to kind of help out with the interview stuff, so don't worry about like donating and subscribing or any of that stuff. I'm not really here to monetize any of this. I'm just here to help people out. So hopefully you find it helpful. If you do, tell a friend. That would be the biggest thing for me. I'm not here to make money, but I'm here to make a community and help kind of build up the community. I'm hoping to get some folks on the stream as well, who are targeting specific communities. That I actually just connected with one today. And so I'm hoping to get her on the show at some point. But yeah, I'm just here to help people out. And so if you find this helpful, please tell other people about it. All the old videos are going up on YouTube, so you can check out YouTube. You can just do a bang YouTube in chat, and that'll give you the YouTube channel. Yeah, we'll see you on the next stream. So Thursday coming up, I'm hoping to have some HR reps on the stream on Thursday. If that works out, if not, I'll announce on LinkedIn and Twitter what the theme's going to be. But hopefully get some information about what applicant tracking systems are actually doing with these resumes. And we'll get the lowdown from them, like, do they really prefer Word docs or PDFs? How should the resume be formatted to get through the ATS? How do they screen them? How do they hand them off to engineering managers and so on? And what does that process typically look like from an HR point of view? So hopefully we'll get some tips and ideas from them. I'd also like to find out from other companies, like, are they hiring any differently now because of remote, hybrid kind of work, things like that. So we'll focus on that hopefully for this Thursday. Still buttoning up some final details on there. But hopefully this stream was helpful around Leetcode. Let me know in the comments on YouTube if you found it helpful, and on Twitch. We'll see you next time. Cheers.